Hello, welcome to Contact. I'm Gloria Crichton, and with me today at Anderson's Restaurant is well-known human rights activist and one of the founders of Amnesty International for British Columbia, Jennifer Wade. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, Gloria. A pleasure to be here.
You look very relaxed and young for all of the wonderful work you've done worldwide in the name of justice. Now, I know that you don't like to talk about yourself, and you said to me, let's just get on with the human issues, but I want to start the interview with a little quote just to give our viewers a sense of who you are and what got you into this position, okay? To quote, when Jennifer Wade graduated from the University of New Brunswick in the 1950s, she might easily have chosen the road that most people of us choose: job, family, personal satisfactions, and a comfortable detachment from the world's problems. But she is not that kind of person. Instead, she devoted her life to human rights work, most of it as a volunteer, fighting for the underdog and speaking for the inarticulate. Now, why did you choose that path, Jennifer? Were there influences in your in your early life, or was it just some sense of innate justice that you have?
I had a mother who was very concerned about justice and always believed in fairness very much. I attributed a great deal to that. I think that, I don't know how these things come about in life. I think that when I was in London, England, and was sitting on a train and read that Amnesty International was beginning, somehow it appealed to me. I wanted to do something in that. I don't really know how it comes about, Gloria. I would never have thought of those days in Fredericton that I would have had a life in justice issues. Sometimes I feel it's almost for a person who hates fighting and hates dissension, and I'm never out of it now. Yeah. And I think what a strange irony in life, really.
Well, it hasn't, like I say, it's done you good. You look great. Actually, you have an interesting past. You were born in the Maritimes.
No, I was born in India.
Oh, you're born in India.
I was born in India, but I come from a very old maritime family. Is that
right?
My father's family has been there many, many generations.
And you were born in India. Well, would living amongst the poverty at a young age have maybe perhaps something to do with it?
No, because I don't think children see poverty. Yeah. I think that what might have had something to do with it was the very loving childhood I had in India. It was a very privileged and very loving childhood. Perhaps out of all that, I feel I owe a great deal. Perhaps that had more to do with it. And certainly it was just a very beautiful beginning in life. I would wish it for any child.
Great. So it was in the 50s that you initially became involved with Amnesty International in England?
No, in the 60s.
In the 60s?
It began in 1961.
Okay. All right.
And that was when I went along to some of the first meetings there. And right away, as soon as I heard about Amnesty, I thought, this is something where I could serve. This is something I would like to do.
Oh, it probably was a vehicle for this internal thing that you've always had.
I think so.
So you just found your niche there.
It just appealed to me, really. And I've been with it, as you know.
Well, now, you've written thousands and thousands of letters to dictators and tyrants and despots, and you've been successful in freeing political prisoners of conscience. And here you are, a little woman. What did you do to be successful?
Well, I can never take credit alone. There's a whole lot of people working on these issues. Yeah. But I always tell people coming after me now, I say the thing is persevere, don't give up. And I always say it's like the ant in the elephant's ear. Eventually it can bring the big beast down, but don't give up, keep with it.
So the power of the written word and persistence.
The power of the written word and the power of persistence. Yes, that's essentially how it's done. Yeah. And getting to know it's Amnesty that's taught me all the tricks for this, really. I call them tricks because very often that's what it amounts to.
Yeah. Tricks, techniques. You've written letters for prisoners, famous prisoners and some obscure, famous people like Nelson Mandela, the Canadian Bruce Curtis, who you helped out. He's back in Canada. And you have one that you're very involved with now, Leonard Peltier.
But let me say, Gloria, in talking about Amnesty, Bruce Curtis had nothing to do with Amnesty.
No,
that was just a justice issue which moved me very greatly because the fellow had had a legal lynching.
That's right.
And so I began a press campaign to get him back to Canada.
I know his dad came to you at one point and said that the Canadian government had done all they had, case was closed, and his son would remain in the prison in the States. And you said,
That's
oh no,
correct.
the next you won't be seeing those kind of letters again, and you were right.
That's
So we
correct.
thank
we
you
got
for-
him back.
yeah.
But that was with a good number of people.
Yes.
But I began the press campaign, and Jack Webster out here helped me out a great deal to get the West Coast in.
So it's really rewarding work. And okay, to get on to another case that you're very interested in is Leonard Peltier, as who, to quote you, has been rotting in prison for 25 years.
21 years.
21
it is,
years.
Yes.
Okay, for those that don't know, can you quickly recap who he is
Yes,
and why?
and I would like to mention something of Canada's involvement. He's a Dakota Sioux Indian, and he was in the Pine Ridge in the United States when 2 FBI agents were killed, and it was put on him. But really, the part where Canada comes into it, he fled to Canada knowing he wouldn't have a fair trial or a fair hearing at all at the time in the United States, and Canada extradited him. It was Warren Almond who was Solicitor General, and he feels terrible about it. He's been in touch with me both by letter and by telephone, and he feels awful because it was on totally fabricated evidence given to him from the American government, and one would never expect that from a sovereign nation that one respects. And Peltier has served 21 years on this fabricated evidence, and nothing has been really done. He's become the symbol to most of Europe and the world indeed. In fact, there's a very good Australian film out on him now of what happens to the North American Indian if they're too clever and too able to organize. So really he's punished for being a good leader, and he had nothing to do with the killing of those 2 FBI agents.
Do you see him coming out in the near future, Jennifer?
Yes, I had vowed to
Good.
myself that 1997 wouldn't pass until I had done everything I could to see what can be done to get him out. And I think there are movements everywhere now. I think the Europeans, the UN has come in on it, the indigenous peoples have come in on it, and he's known everywhere around the world. I don't know what the holdup is, except that it would be the FBI would be put under question. And perhaps, I don't understand why the Clintons haven't moved on this. They're well aware of his case. And why indeed our own Alan Rock hasn't gone forward to make a strong protest from Canada, because Canada was absolutely fooled and hoodwinked about it all. It's a very sad story.
Well, I think a lot of people dampen their conscience when it comes to political matters and red tape and that kind of thing.
Unfortunately, yes, but a
Yes.
man has suffered very
Yeah.
greatly, 21 years. And he's not bitter.
No.
I have correspondence from him,
Yeah.
and people who have actually gone to the prison to talk with him. He's not bitter, he's sad. And there, many people say they do know the person who did do the shooting, but he himself has said, I've served the time, let's not go back to that, it was another era.
Wonderful person. I hope he's out soon.
I hope so too.
Speaking of injustices and people who try to strive for the right and follow their conscience and suffer because of it, another person comes to mind that you're involved with, Kevin Annett, United Church minister.
This young United Church minister,
Yeah.
and this is right here in BC that this has happened. And the United Church has a hearing at the moment, an ongoing hearing, to see if he's fit to continue ministry. I mean, the whole thing is so absurd and so ironical. Right from the very beginning, from having the executive secretary of Conference out here. Now, Conference is the governing body here that oversees presbyteries. There are about 10 conferences across Canada, and then there are presbyteries within this conference. And the executive secretary of Conference actually chose the panel. He likes to use the word suggested the panel. And he himself testifying against Kevin. And then there's a chief judicial officer, a man called John Jessamine, a lawyer, who was once up for moderator of the United Church. Now he's sort of acting a little bit as judge and legal advisor to the so-called jury, the panel. And I mean, the whole thing, the hearing closed January the 28th, not for good, but it closed at that time, with a motion that John Jessamine stepped down because of a seeming conflict of interest by serving Presbytery Conference, both branches of the church, and also by being very involved. Evidence has come to light he was actually very involved. on keeping it impossible for Kevin Annett to come back into the church too. This is
very unjust.
Unreal, and it's not doing the church any good. It's dug itself in very deeply,
Which
and
is
it's ongoing.
Now, which is a shame, Jennifer, because the United Church has a reputation of fighting for minorities and doing good. But tell us, can you summarize what Kevin's crime was?
He doesn't know. This is the thing. It's like he calls it an Alice in Wonderland world. The church has said he has done nothing wrong. That's the church's own admission to the press.
Well,
He's
he did
got
a
no
lot
charges against him.
Yeah.
But I think his crime is that where it all began, or where it seems to have begun, he wrote a letter about land claims for the native people. Now, this was after he had taken a landlord to arbitration about slum housing in Port Alberni. He doesn't talk. He acts. He goes ahead and does something.
Just for recap for viewers that don't know of him, he was moved to Port Alberni as the minister for the church there, and quickly saw the plight of the poor natives, invited them into the church and helped them, and this created most of the problems with the congregation in the church. So
exactly.
This was,
and then of course he did something. He invited the natives to use his pulpit. Well, I mean, they told stories of alleged murders and terrible sexual abuse in the residential schools, awfully sad stories. And probably sitting in the congregation were friends and relatives of the alleged perpetrators.
Yeah.
So, you know, he had to go. But the cruelty of what he has gone through and the blocking of letting him seek any reconciliation, and I really think the church has lost out terribly. They should have used him in a mission church with the natives. He's one of the first ministers to be trusted by the natives. And ironically, the natives have spoken to me about having a potlatch to honor his mother, a feast to honor his mother, because she has such a brave and truthful son. And here at the same time, the United Church of Canada, supposedly a mainline liberal church. I grew up in it, Gloria. I grew up in it very much, the comfortable pew. So it saddens me. It's a very sad story. The destruction the church is doing to itself and the harm that it's done this young man. By age 38, he had done so much in a ministry. He's very, very clever. Perhaps that's his problem, as with Leonard Peltier, too clever for his own good.
He's working at the moment in his PhD in Native Studies at UBC.
And doing exceptionally well, which of course he would. And this with a hearing, and his marriage has fallen apart. I don't know how he's taking all the pressures that are upon him at the moment. I really don't. At times, I've sat right through the hearing. I've missed only one day. At times, I've really wondered, are they trying to break him? Are they really trying to break him? How is he withstanding all of this?
It's difficult for someone that's done what they thought is what Jesus Christ would have wanted you to do.
Oh, his faith is very deep.
Poor,
it's almost enviable.
Do you see him getting back into the church? I know he wants to.
I won't make that prediction. I'm in there because the bottom line is he has done no wrong. Whoever Kevin Annett is, I didn't know him before at all. But the thing is, he has done no wrong. And the church is far less than noble in what it's done with all the irregularities that have come out in this hearing.
Well, good luck on that one, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Another issue that's very close to your heart is China.
Yes.
Now, a country with 1/5 of the world's population, surely there's an area for a lot of human rights abuse. Could you quickly list, and then we'll talk about Deng, list some of the issues that concern you?
Yes, I'm the China Regional Action Coordinator for one of the groups out here in BC. And for the last, 7 years, dealing with some of the most awful human rights abuses one can imagine.
Can you just go through some of them?
Yes, I will. One thing, of course, the imprisonment of what China calls counter-revolutionaries. Now, that can be anyone who speaks up against officials and authorities, to any form of dissident, really, within China. And the imprisonment of them with no due process of law, often no access to a lawyer, no access to family members, and often torture, and indeed many cases execution. I mean, China has just used the death penalty indiscriminately. Last year Amnesty got 3,000 names against which the death penalty had been used for little things, for minor things, and for being outspoken. And I mean, the other thing with China, of course, it has tried to squash anyone who has any religious aspirations. People who are sort of religious in mode can be very strong-willed, and China does not go for this. So it's gone after the Muslims, the Christian communities, the old priests who remain true to the Vaticans, and in Tibet, of course, the Buddhists, the nuns, and the priests that have suffered there, the monks in Tibet. And then the other thing, of course, with China, some of the things that I've felt outraged with, the vivisection going on, the taking of organs from prisoners, and 90% of all transplanted organs come from prisoners. And also within these prisons, the labor force. There's a labor force within the prisons of China that equals the total labor force of Spain. And I mean, they work under long hours, difficult conditions, no pay.
Is this where we get our countries receive all their cheap toys? And
I'm afraid
is it from
so.
the prisons?
And
Yeah.
also our lovely linens and silks
that
that are put
right?
together. But it goes all the way from tea plantations to making trucks. And Harry Wu, the American journalist who was imprisoned within China, I mean, he has revealed a great deal of what's been going on within the prisons, and that's why China doesn't look on him as a friendly expatriate Chinese at all.
So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Oh, an awful lot. And I can't believe, I mean, my own country's involvement there, you know, to see John Chrétien entertaining people from the People's Liberation Army. That should be headlines in our Canadian press. Instead, it was given just a little bit of coverage in the Courier here. I mean, it's disgraceful to see Chrétien entertaining people like this.
And don't we have an advantage with the trade that surely that could be used
We
to
have
help
an
the
advantage,
human
and
rights
it's for a
situation?
very short period of time. We have an advantage now that we can use trade as leverage, but we're not doing it. And I think China is counting on the West to be greedy, and it's counting on it to be ignorant and stupid, and we're feeding into their fulfillment beautifully. This whole thing, it all boils down to making a dollar. And I think the Chinese mainland leaders even, they're counting on Hong Kong to want just one thing, money.
Money makes the world go round, I'm afraid. Deng passed away, the great leader, Chinese
Yes.
leader, recently, and I know you've got some feelings on that.
I put great with I say the word great
No,
with many
I'm
reservations.
quoting what we've read in a lot of the recent
Yes.
papers,
Yes.
that
Yes.
he was great and that
Well,
he
I'm-
helped the economy.
I'm so
made
awfully
changes.
disappointed with
Yeah.
our local press. I mean, I read an article on the front page of the Vancouver Sun yesterday where somebody says he loved children. What rubbish is being spoken? The whole world has seen these state-run orphanages and what happens to girl children, to deformed children. And what is all this blether about him being a lover of children? And the great man has passed on, except for his mistake, Tiananmen Square. The abuses I've just listed to you, it goes well beyond Tiananmen Square, what's been happening.
So-
Torture in the prisons and misery everywhere.
So he, Deng, was responsible for this.
He was responsible. He gave the okay to even Tiananmen Square happening. And now we have generals coming out of China, actually one reviewed by the Boston Globe recently, who said Tiananmen Square never happened. I mean, it's almost like telling people what you saw you didn't see. You know, it's enough to make people crazy, this kind of thing. And if this goes on to the outside world, which saw this as fact, what goes on in the inside? But I feel so badly when I read this about this great little old man passing. He was a tyrant, he was a dictator, he was a murderer. And why aren't we telling the truth? Well, the answer is because we want to be in good favor with Chinese officials. Did you notice very few Amnesty International people have been interviewed?
Yes.
Very few.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think the Sun did a big article on businessmen being interviewed.
That's right.
Well, of course, what are they going to say when, look at the potential for selling refrigerators and electric fans to China. And the Asian Wall Street Journal has said by the year 2050, China will be one of the main economic countries in the world. But for this small period in history, when we have some leverage, we're not using it. I'm not saying, Gloria, not to trade with China, not by any means. What I'm saying is have the courage and the guts to go in there and give a few names. Amnesty can supply anyone with them. What's happened to these people? What's happened to the families of these people? I mean, just yesterday I got 5 cases on my desk of people, intellectuals, poets and philosophers being persecuted in Inner Mongolia. You know, the problem is right across China. And we're not doing anything. We're playing right into their laps
And
like a lot of gullible.
the average Canadian does not know the information. As you say, the papers are not giving it to
No.
us. It's censored.
No.
We don't know what's happening.
No, no.
So it seems like an insurmountable kind of thing for you to fight. The work just seems so much.
Well, one just has to keep on with it.
And the
because
average
it's so
person
terribly
can make
important.
a difference, as you say. One person can.
Oh, indeed.
So
One
the tendency,
person-
though, is to give up. When I listen to it, I feel like, why bother? It's so.
No, I think again,
Yeah.
you have to be persistent and keep there and keep telling the story and getting it out, as you're letting me do on the show here.
Wonderful. So, to go, you've been, like, human rights has been your main thing for most of your life, your main involvement, but you've also had a career as a very successful writer and teacher, and wife and mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd like to go back and talk about some of the universities you've taught at. You were at Berkeley during was it the 60s?
Yes, and then I taught at Emory University in the South.
Now this
and
one
that was when I
yeah.
began working with Martin Luther King's. Well, I didn't work with Martin Luther King. I worked with the Southern Regional Council. We were across the road from Martin Luther King, who worked with the student Christian movement. But
Now this was, if I could just elaborate, Jennifer, it was Elmo University in Atlanta, Georgia, the Deep South.
That's right,
In
Emory
the 60s,
University.
and you were called White Commie.
Indeed I
Why?
was. Indeed I was. Well, I remember I taught a senior writing course, and I was teaching the art of rhetoric. And always very safely, the Gettysburg Address had been used as an example of the art of rhetoric. And I decided that I would use a very beautiful piece of rhetorical writing, the letter from the Birmingham jail that Martin Luther King wrote when he was actually in prison, and his need to serve a higher law. And I suppose from that I was looked on as that outsider in here, first of all, trying to begin this London-based thing called Amnesty International, and then working for this black troublemaker, Martin Luther King.
It was because you were helping the blacks.
Yes.
And your car was
Yes.
spray painted, your family in New
That's
Brunswick
right.
was
Yes, that's the
hassled.
odd thing.
Yeah.
The RCMP went to my family who were living in New Brunswick. Well, my mother had never heard of Amnesty International. These were the very first years of the organization. And she was just filled with
Wondering,
chagrin. Who
what
were
were you
my
involved
friends
with?
and what was I doing? And they had told her that I was working for a black man who'd been put in prison. This happened to be Martin Luther King. But I mean, I can say it all with a smile now, but they
yes,
were
you
very
can.
frightening days.
I'm sure they were.
You know, when I see the Martin Luther King holiday celebrated every year, and I just think, it wasn't like that. It was very frightening. And I was very afraid then of implicating my family. Now I feel much freer. My family's grown up. I have no job to account to, no pension. I can work very freely. I'm an extremely free person, Gloria.
And you've been recognized. Last year you had a nice thing at your alma mater. You received, tell us. Actually, that quote that we opened the show with came from your day where you were presented with.
Well, that was very lovely that the University of New Brunswick saw fit to give me an honorary doctorate degree, a Doctor of Letters, for my work in social justice. And it was a very brave thing for them to do, because they know I will not stop speaking out. I will go on where I see injustices. And they were actually asked, isn't this taking a terrible chance? And the president of the university very kindly said, I will stand behind her. And that was a very wonderful thing to have. That was even more wonderful than the degree itself, to know that the university was brave enough to do this, because generally they choose very safe people in society.
Good for them.
Yes.
You also recently received another degree, not a degree, an honor, an award.
The United Nations
Right.
Association Award and that too was for a contribution of social justice, contribution to social justice issues across the country, and that was very lovely to get. And I was so pleased for my family, because my two sons have grown up with justice issues around the home ever since they were very young, and they've always said to me, "Oh, Mum, you've worked so hard, and what's it for?" And I think even this little bit of recognition from outside meant a very great deal to them. They saw that it doesn't go unrecognized, working on the phone and working with people who are in trouble and the powerless and the inarticulate. And I only wish I'd known 20 years ago the things I know now to continue on with this.
Great, Jennifer. Jennifer, there's so much more that we could have spoken about. Children have been close to you, you've been involved in children's villages. You are very concerned about foster children, but that's got to be for another interview. Our time is at an end. But I would like to close this interview with one last quote, and this time from Martin Luther King. Okay? Martin Luther King once aptly explained why we need people like Jennifer Wade. He was in jail in Birmingham when he wrote, just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myth and half-truths, so must we see the need for non-violent gadflies to create this kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. And keep up the good work, non-violent gadfly, Jennifer
Thank you
Wade.
very, very
Thank
much,
you.
Gloria.
I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Andersons for providing this lovely setting for the interviews. For Contact, I'm Gloria Crichton. Please join us next time.